Hi, everyone, and welcome. I'm Simon Ellis. I'm an artist and researcher and scholar here at the Centre for Dance Research at Coventry University. And together with Lily Hayward-Smith, who you can see, or who's the third screen across from me, who's waving now, Lily and I, we're responsible for curating what's called C-DaRE Invites. Each year it has a different theme. And today is the third of 4 conversations exploring the theme of this series, which is the body and land. And the series came about, I guess, probably in direct response to I'll describe it as the sort of screenification of our lives. And here we are. And the kind of recognition, ironically, I guess, and recognition that how we are in, on and even of the land is fundamental to being human and perhaps even how we take care of this planet. And so I initially approached Katrina McPherson. Katrina and I have worked together a lot in the past in different contexts, but certainly as artists. And together, Katrina and I invited Tia-Monique Uzor and Lucy Cash, and to have a conversation built around their films. One film, The Noise My Leaves Make Me, by Tia-Monique, and How the Earth Must See Itself, a Thirling, by Lucy Cash and Simone, Kenyon. We are also, I'll get to the Henning Langenheim thing in a little bit. So part of the, as you would have said in the seen in the invitation, was to also look at some of the work of Henning. And the idea, as hopefully you've known, was for you to watch these films by Lucy and Tia-Monique, as well as the photographs before this conversation, a little bit doing things backwards, but so that this conversation had some kind of context through things you'd seen. So I'll just briefly introduce the 4 of us. Tia-Monique is an artist scholar using Africanist dance to explore diasporic worlds through embodied interdisciplinary research. And welcome, Tia-Monique. It's such a pleasure to see you. And Lucy Cash is an interdisciplinary artist, curator, and moving image maker exploring expanded sensory reciprocity with the more than human. I hadn't even practiced saying that word. And Lucy, a big, big welcome to you. I am a choreographer and filmmaker. I work a lot through practices research through the institution, universities. And finally, Katrina McPherson is a director, artist, and educator, and also author of Making Video Dance, which is everywhere and anywhere. Katrina, shall I hand over to you briefly to talk about Henning?
Yes, thank you, Simon. So Henning Langenheim was actually my uncle. So he was born 1950, died young in his early 50s in 2004. And he was a German photographer. And I had always realized that he was a massive influence on myself and also my brother, who's a photographer. But it's only been more recently, and actually particularly when we started to think about this particular conversation, that I revisited some of his work and really felt that it might add another layer to the kind of conversations we want or might want to have. So the particular project, and Simon, are you going to be sharing your screen now? Yeah, thank you. So the project that I was wanting to share with you, that came with the initial link, which now has been difficult to access. So what we've done here is selected 4 or 5 images from this particular book, Mordfelder, which it basically means murder fields. And this was a project that Henning carried out in the 80s and 90s. He was very much of that generation in Germany, came of age in the 1960s. That was the first sort of post-war generation that really started to investigate forensically what happened during the Nazi time. And so as a photographer, he was particularly drawn to looking at sites in Eastern Europe that had been right at the center of the Second World War, the conflict between the Nazis, the Soviet Union's army in the East. So looking at these sites, and particularly sites where he, through his research, identified that atrocities against predominantly Jewish residents of those areas had happened. So what he was curious about, and what he shows us through his photographs and through his lens, are really this, in a sense, the memorial to the things that have happened there. And I think what I find so curious about it is, you know, if you look at the book, there are some images, not the ones we're showing here, where there is actually a memorial and there's information about what's happened. But in many more sites, there are simply traces, and they're traces that, you know, if you really look at it with your own eyes, maybe being in that space, you would never know what had happened there. And I think for me that sparks off ideas about, first of all, about, you know, who is allowed to be in certain spaces. These people were being removed from the landscape that they lived in. But also how photography, the lens, and witnessing in this way can really serve as an aid to our memory on about the many layers of human history and activity that exist in landscapes. So apologies that it's been hard to get hold of the images. Hopefully you can see here a small selection of them. And that can kind of inform our conversation a little bit as well.
Thanks, Katrina. I'll just let these sit just a little while. We don't have to rush.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Just to talk through the format with everyone. So what we're going to do now is have there's an improvised conversation between the four of us, which will last about 40 minutes. We'll stop at about 10 to 3. And then we'll have a little body pause, as they say, for 5 minutes, just for people to stretch, go to the toilet, do whatever you need. And then there'll be a conversation with you all. And you can ask questions in the chat. You can just drop them in the chat anytime, or you can raise your virtual hand or real hand even if we can see you. Actually, virtual hand's probably a better idea given the way the notifications work. I'll make the assumption that the questions in the chat mean you don't want to read them out, that you would rather someone else read them out. But you can, if you'd rather you can just let either Lily or me know. And just finally, this conversation is being recorded. It's part of the way we archive this series or these C-DaRE invites, and they'll go up in fact, this part will be cut out just so that people don't have to sit through introductions. Well, they're actually tricky with Henning's photographs. We'll have to figure that one out. I'm going to stop sharing now. We will that will go up on the website in a couple of weeks after this conversation. Lily, so maybe if we did the spotlighting thing. Is it already spotlight?
I'm just adding you all.
Thank you.
It'll take me just 30 seconds to add you all. So then everyone should see 4 screens. There we go.
Thank you. So I think I'm gonna start. First of all, Tia-Monique and Lucy, what a pleasure. Lucy, I'd seen your film before, but what a pleasure to see them see your film again, and Tia-Monique to see your film for the first time. I was drawn deeply to both how they are similar, but also how they are remarkably different. And so perhaps one way to kind of kick off this this conversation is to ask you both to talk about or to describe your relationship to land. And this might be either land as a symbol of a kind of nation state, or it also might be land as kind of organic or biological matter. So you can choose how it is that you might want to think of that term land. Tia-Monique, do you want to have a go first? Is that putting you on the spot? I mean, you are spotlight.
No. No, thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this conversation. I'm super excited to have it and to respond to Lucy's wonderful film and also Langenheim's work as well. Yeah, land is super complex for me, and I suppose that's one of the reasons where, you know, the film actually comes from being British Caribbean, from Jamaican family from Jamaica and Barbados, and yeah, growing up with a mother who loved flowers, loved for us to be in the countryside, having come from Kitson Town in Jamaica, which is kind of more towards the country-ish. It's not country, but it's more the country-ish in Jamaica. and being the only, growing up in Colchester, Essex, being the only Black girl, but also having a mother that took us a lot to, you know, go and pick raspberries. Well, you know, she would take us down to Devon, take us down to Cornwall, and Obston being the only Black face. And so part of the film actually came from the contrast that I experienced when we would go and visit Jamaica, actually, in my youth, and how there was a complete freedom with like climbing mango trees, jumping into rivers, just being with the land. You know, in Kitson Town, Jamaica, there's this the ground is actually clay, this red clay. It's infamous for that, and so it's about, you know, playing with that, but also having this thing of not getting it on your clothes, because once it's stayed forever. You know, if it rains, all of those things. And the contrast to growing up in Colchester, where if we did go into the countryside, we'd be feeling very surveilled, not feeling as comfortable, staying closer to my mother in that instance, and thinking like, what does it mean to reconcile these two things, as someone who's Black British, in which this is the land that I was born on. I was born in the UK, and so this is the land that I'm supposed to be able to claim, but also feeling very surveilled in that space. And then being Caribbean, having Jamaican heritage, but also not fully being able to be, you know, you still don't know all the codes. You still don't know what you're supposed to do. You don't know what this plant does versus that plant. You don't know, you know, there's big cultures around bush teas, a big culture around, you know, healing from the land, and not actually that being strange to you as well. So the film was really a question, and it was taken from Derek Walcott's essay Isla Incognita, where he talked about colonialism, and he's talking about how the enslaved people have been renamed and lost their identities, but also the land has lost its name. The land has been renamed itself. And so what does it mean where the land has to continue, even though it's been sectioned, you know, it's been replanted, all of these things, the land has to continue to reclaim and grow. And he talked about us as enslaved people also reclaiming that land and understanding that land as a necessity. And so the film is trying to do that same process, and that process is my own process of trying to find my space as a British Caribbean in Caribbean island, but first and foremost on the British Isles in which I was born.
Amazing, Tia. It's so great to hear all of that and actually really feel how that is an underpinning to the film. So gorgeous to hear. I am a Londoner and grew up in the suburbs of the city. So nature, when I was growing up, was recreational parks. I had a granny who was really interested in gardening, but I didn't really feel a particular connection to the land. And then I really feel like I consciously began to seek out and learn how to be connected to land. And I got into that through being really interested in plant medicine. And then we're really wanting to understand plants. And there's a term now that's plant blindness, where we've lost, certainly in the UK, certainly in England, we're losing more and more that knowledge that used to get passed down. Everything about like dock leaves growing next to nettles. So if you had a sting, you'd rub a dock leaf on it. And I just got really interested in that knowledge. And that knowledge obviously is often oral, often passed down the female line. And so that was my background. And then I've lived in quite a few different places, but I lived in Scotland for 7 years. And the thing about Scotland, which is really different to England, is you have a very different right to roam. So there's a whole other politics there in terms of where you're allowed to be on the land, whoever you are. Not, of course, completely acknowledging that in my whiteness, that's very much easier for me, but there's a different sense of being able to roam where you want to, which is a contested thing in England. And the film is partly this sort of this is a response to the work of Nan Shepherd, who I think many people know her now because fortunately her work is much more acknowledged and widely read. But Nan Shepherd, born 1893, died 1981 in Aberdeen, and she spent her life living in West Cults, which is a little village or town that's about 3 or 4 miles from the where the foothills of the Cairngorms begin. The Cairngorm Mountains are this phenomenal geographical area, which are from the Devonian period, which I had to look up, which is like 400 million years ago they were formed. They used to be as high as the Alps. Over that time, they've kind of flattened. They have a like year-long wind, so trees in the Cairngorms are often like these bonsai kind of type pines or juniper bushes, just to give you a flavor of the place. So for me, going to that place, it was super alien, actually. And I felt very privileged to be able to spend time in that place and to learn the codes of it. And there's a lot more to say about how Nan Shepherd gave me a way into that and gave Simone too a way into that. But that's probably where I'll stop for now.
Thank you both. Katrina, I mean, I'm kind of a little bit, I'm not quite sure how to handle this, in the sense I sort of felt like I should ask you as well. So I'd
like to respond.
Go on.
Yeah, I'd like to talk about my relationship to the land. Thank you, and it's wonderful to hear from Tia-Monique and Lucy. So I'm Scottish German, but I grew up in Edinburgh. But my whole family, my Scottish family, come from Aberdeenshire, from very close to where Nan Shepherd's from. So I spent a lot of my childhood going into the northeast, to the Highlands, and then having studied in London, lived in Glasgow and London, I then was trying to work out how long ago it was, but I think it was 25 years ago, moved to the Highlands of Scotland, actually to the west side of the Cairngorms, initially Newton Moor, which looks directly onto the Cairngorms. It's in between the Cairngorms and the Mona Lea, and then further round the corner on the Murray coast. So again, very much in the area of the Cairngorms. And thinking as an artist, I think how that shifted my thinking was, up until that point, I had really always seen the human body very much in relation to human-built environments. That's how I kind of saw my existence and the existence of bodies. But then living there in the landscape, it became really kind of much more apparent to me how the narratives are in the landscape can be something that we interact with. And I suppose for me that, in my own films over the last 25 years, that's been what I've been exploring, is with many different people and many different collaborations. But yeah, thinking about access to those spaces, but and really, themes of who belongs in those spaces and who's allowed to belong in those spaces. And of course, that's very complex. And Lucy's right to point out that on one level in Scotland, it feels much more that we can all go where we want. There is no such thing as trespassing in Scotland, but there's also responsibility to the land that goes hand in hand with that. So I think that's important. But also, as we know, like and particularly in somewhere as what's the word? Obvious, on one level, featureless as the Cairngorms, you can very easily detect traces of human activity, but it's often very difficult to know what that was. And I think once you begin to learn more about the history of that landscape and the more recent history of the landscape, for example, one of the things that comes up is the history of the clearances in Scotland. So often this kind of romantic notion of the empty glen is only because the indigenous people were violently evicted. So I think for me that's been the sort of learning of living in that landscape, has been really an awareness, an increased awareness of that kind of very complex and multi-layered history that we have. And it seems, and this is maybe how I'd like to try and sort of relate it to Henning as well, which is really sort of his work, which has struck me more recently, is that actually the political and legal context that we live in and exist in does have an impact on the landscape and how we relate to that landscape. And these things can be quite insidious and quite local, so that maybe, I was actually in the Cairngorms this last weekend, and we were on the east coast of the Cairngorms, and I was looking up a tiny wee glen, and there was a little bit of information, an information sheet there, and it said, you know, in this little tiny glen there used to be about 800 people living, and then they moved away. Now, without that information, all you see is a few rocks. And I think that's really interesting. And I think in a way that's what Henning was doing with his photography, going, okay, that looks like a little lump of hill or a sand dune, but actually there's another whole story there. So yeah, so that's my relationship to the land on one level.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, because I mean, I think the links with Henning's work are very clear in terms of just the kinds of language that you've all been using of loss. We seem to talk about loss in relation to land quite a little bit. Tia-Monique used the word of reclaiming, and you describe how the land has lost its name, for example, which is both haunting and beautifully poetic as well, and then even the kind of the history of the clearances in Scotland, Katrina. Does anyone, Tia-Monique or Lucy, do you want to talk any more about something about that in terms of just to continue this sort of part of the conversation?
Yeah, thank you so much, Katrina. I was just thinking about, the kind of the invisible connections that I was looking on Henning's work, and just thinking, when you look at something, what are actually the stories, or what did that tree see, or what did that, that 100, like those things that are within that space. And I definitely think, I was specifically thinking about the connections, and I know me and you have been speaking about that, but again, like the Caribbean Isles to the UK, which we all know is a colonial child of the UK, but actually those very direct connections, and we see that on so many different levels, not just in more contemporary, the things that are happening in the global south, on the Caribbean islands, is a foreshadowing of what will happen in terms of climate change. In the British Isles, but also those histories. So my direct connection, that my ancestors are actually Scottish, and that the direct link from that to the Caribbean islands, and how then those lands speak to each other and tell a story of how people have engaged, how people have lost, how people have loved, how people have been violently forced in many different ways through those spaces. And I think part of the loss of that history is, as you're saying, is the disengagement with the land.
I wonder whether I could make a little turn here. It's so important what you're both saying, but what's coming into my mind is just this phrase from Nan Shepherd that she says, if I had other senses, there would be other things that I could perceive or see. And I think I'm really aware that we're talking about visual mediums. We're talking about 2 films and a set of incredible photographs, which are predominantly requiring sight as the way that we perceive them. And I feel like one of the incredible things about Nan Shepherd's writing, and how it allowed me to access a connection to a place, was that it invites a whole-bodied response that includes touch, that includes smell, that includes hearing. And that was something I got from your film, very much so, Tia, that engagement of the senses. And I feel like that has been really important, and is an important offering for anyone to make a connection to a place that isn't theirs, to perhaps go beyond the visual.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was one of the things, and I thank you so much for that, Lucy. That was one of the things that we worked with the dancers like a lot with. So we spent, how funding is, and R&D processes are not as long, are never as long as you want them to be. But our first day of rehearsals was actually us, just before any movement, just being in these spaces, going into water, being with the trees, and actually trying to bring that felt sense out, and obviously a lot of that is evoked with the accompaniment and all of the colouring, all of those things all work together to do it. But I do think that yeah, part of, I think, the work of both of our films as well is for people to actually be curious to go back into those spaces. And I think, you know, for me, it's also, you know, as Black British, being like, okay, this is a place that, and I'm not trying to say this in a way to kind of dismiss like kind of real hostilities, and we even as a film crew experienced a lot of hostilities making that film, but as a way to really engage with that space again, especially as we're going more and more living in cities.
I felt that watching the film again, Tia-Monique, particularly that last image, which is almost like a sort of baptism, isn't it? Mm-hmm. And I felt like that in a way, and hearing what you're saying now, kind of has this sense of being baptized into something. Like my understanding of baptism is it's into, you know, it's welcoming you into the church, and here it's like a baptism of the landscape. Into the landscape, in a sense of belonging to that, so that has a real resonance. Absolutely. And it adds that perspective, which I think, Lucy, I feel is like in, you know, in your film, Nan Shepherd, through your film, this idea of how the earth must see itself, this sense of coming out of our bodies into something that's sort of immersive in a way. Because that is also a thing about access, isn't it? We can't actually all go up to the top of a mountain. Places are either inaccessible because of trespass laws or because of they're far away, they're brutal, they're difficult, you have to be able to walk, all these things. And in fact, we were noticing that the weekend. My daughter said, oh, we can only get to this place because we can drive to the car park because there's no public transport. And I was like, yeah, this is what it's about. You know, it's like, so that sense of how we can take our cameras, our sound, our editing into those spaces, our bodies into those spaces, and then make them accessible in some way, or the questions around them accessible. So it's a great point. Yeah.
Also, I really made a connection between that beautiful image of baptism to there's a chapter in Nan Shepherd's book which is about sleeping on the mountain, which I always return to. It's both actual, she did sleep in the mountain at various different times of day, but also it feels like metaphorical, as in like entirely surrendering your conscious senses and to allow yourself to submerge and go underneath into the unknown and into the unexpected. And yeah, I feel like that a sense of knowing somewhere through letting go of trying to know it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that final, that stuck with me. I think it's out of the body into the mountain, mm-hmm. Out of the body into the mountain. That was that line just stayed with me, especially the way that it was, the composition around that within the film. And yeah, that final scene, which is of a baptism of sorts, but I often talk about it as like a surrendering to belonging. I actually talk about it as in terms of surrendering to belonging. Like, what does it mean where we, and especially when you're kind of, sometimes when you go into these spaces like the countryside and into these rural areas, and it's just you, once you've gotten through all of those things, the hostilities. I know it's Latifah White, that's the dancers. I know she had a film crew and all of that, but the scene leading up to that was one take. That was complete one take, and it was like complete. It was just like everything in that moment was just stopped as she did that final scene, and this idea of witnessing as well as an aid to memory that you spoke about, like that witnessing of surrendering, like, no, I'm gonna step out, I'm going to take this land by necessity, by perforce. I'm going to surrender to land as a way to surrendering to the complexities of my identities, to the complexities of these histories, which is a timeline I've just been born into, but actually there's something here that I can grab into. I can surrender to this body of water, which was a reservoir, to this reservoir, in the same way that I would surrender within the Caribbean Sea and make those connections. So yeah, I completely resonate with that and the process that we went through.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. And there's something about and allowing us to see in your film this this very present moment surrender, which I think then echoes backwards and forwards in time. It's really beautiful.
I was sure about this shift, but it's a slight shift. It's kind of going to a sort of technical aspect. Well, hopefully not too much like that. But one of the things that struck me, one of the big differences in the two films was the kind of presence or or the type of sound we were listening to. I've just spent a week more or less in Dorset working with Helen Poyner, and very much kind of I'll just say deep in the land there. And one of the things, the sort of sensory experiences, and that's mostly we're working with our eyes open, but one of the deep sensory experiences are just how much of the kind of sonic world was filling my experience of those spaces, those sites. And Tia-Monique, it seems like there was almost, I don't think there's any ambient sound or even diegetic sound. It's effectively a score that's played over the top. I might be wrong there, but Lucy, I got the impression of a very subtle presence of the sounds of the ambient sound, of the sounds of nature. And it was in quite direct contrast, you might say, to my sense of the kind of rushing of sound, whether that was by the sea or even in inland spaces, where the way in which the wind was working its ways on my, I guess my auditory system. And perhaps is there something for you to say or to imagine about how you understand sound in relation to land, in relation to these films?
I could go. I think we knew that sound was going to have an equal place to image within the film, and that again really comes from wanting to invite an embodied experience for the audience, which, by the way, music absolutely does as well. It's a different way of doing that, but I guess because what I mentioned maybe right at the beginning, that the presence of wind is fairly constant all year round in the Cairngorms, but however it really drops. Like sometimes it's just like the sonata of the wind varies considerably. It's like a very particular way of experiencing air. And we were lucky enough to have a really brilliant documentary sound recordist who did lots of sound recordings, and not just diegetic sound, but would go off and record at other moments in time. We actually only had about 3 days to film, and we had a lot of rain. And I should also say, one of the things, like thinking back about the experience, was that we were filming on film, and we had to walk a long way. We had to walk miles, in fact, with our equipment. So I kind of love the fact that the whole thing was like this endurance performance that you never see, because that's all happening behind the camera. But anyway, I digress. But yeah, the layering up of sound and giving the possibility that, there's a scene with ants that so those close recordings of the sound of more than humans, of other than humans, of the elements of landscape, plant and animal, and to really give them an embodied presence. That was really important. And then the amazing score by Hannah Tuliki is sung by women from local choirs, and the idea of the vocals is, again, it's very inspired. It's coming out of Hannah's response to that landscape. Yeah.
I definitely resonate with and remember that walking miles of equipment for the dancers to get to wherever you wanted to film. Yeah, I think we're in the noise my leads make. We have one little moment where it's very small when Natifa first comes, but other than that, we're like, and I think we working with Elliot Poupe George, it was actually me and him. We actually went to university together, and we worked on at the university I went to, the Montfort University at the time. There was a module called Dance Company, and we're working with the music technologists and then the choreographers and the dancers. Anyway, that's a complete digression, but that's when we met. So we've got a long-standing working relationship, and I really wanted this kind of, again, this Caribbean sense of the sound system, where that really visceral sense of how, again, within this identity, how music has played such a, and accompaniment has played such a integral part of our resistance and our way of being in this world. And so yeah, I really wanted, you come in and there's that straight, and I kept saying to Elliot, like, add more bass, add more, and we kind of were trying to get, straddle between like the sense of foreboding and also this real sense of vibration and feeling. And I think especially, I mean, I'm sure we can all say that there's nothing like seeing the film in an actual cinema with the whole sound system as opposed to on your laptop. But yeah, really wanting that space, but then having that real contrast when we first see Natifa in that final scene where it is a surrender and you're just with the quiet and all those sounds there of the birds, of the wind just coming in before we come back in again. So yeah, I really wanted that drama, I suppose, with that music and that felt sense in the body. And so that's what Elliot and I worked on quite closely together to create.
Beautiful.
Maybe I could add something also about the sound. I really appreciate this, both of your uses of sound in the films, and but what I was just here sort of wondering, I was thinking, so what's the equivalent in a photograph when there's no sound in a sense? And what it was making me think about is, I mean, for me, often the sound is very much about this kind of another layer of the macro and the micro and the meta, as it were. It's kind of simultaneously drawing our attention to detail, but it can also be drawing our attention much wider. So like you were just saying, Tia-Monique, the sort of other resonance of the beatbox of that sort of thing, which is not necessarily literally what you would be hearing in that space, but it's that kind of, so it was really about that. It was thinking about how sonically we can be exploring these kind of different dimensions in a sense, and how then also with the frame, that's what we can be doing, the sort of the detail and what's spoken about in the detail, and almost like what it is that you're not seeing and how that's in your imagination what builds then. So I think there is, like, that's a really sort of interesting connection. And I think yeah, because the literal experience of sound, like you were saying, Simon, when you're in a landscape and there's, it's like but that's we can kind of mitigate that as artists, or we can kind of lean into it, or we can push against it, or we can layer other things, and that in a sense is the beauty of the sound, isn't it? The soundtrack. And yes, even more so if it's in a cinema with yeah.
And maybe just to,
please go ahead.
Yeah, I suppose I should have pointed this out in the first instance, but the title, "The Noise My Leaves Make," is called straight from Derek Walcott's essay. I was just trying to pull up the exact quote if it ever loads, but again, it's about what kind of noise will you, in this reclaiming, what kind of noise comes out, what the leaves that you make, what do they make? Yeah. And so I think, again, that kind of those other resonance, the different, it's like, can we hear the kind of the vibration of the bee makes a noise versus, the crawling of the ant there or there, but what is the noise of a British Caribbean dark-skinned women who are British Caribbean origin claiming that space?
Yeah, and I also just wanted to acknowledge that, so the voiceover is by the actor Shirley Henderson, and Shirley did this incredible job of embodying Nan Shepherd somehow, and she stood up actually to deliver her voiceover, and I feel like, her voice really went towards quite some way of, I don't know quite how to put this, but of trying to become a part of the landscape rather than staying within a kind of clipped human world. Something about the edges of it, the timbre of it, the tone of it, was trying to drop into being part of the landscape. as well as embodying Nan's words in a really interesting way.
I think that was so successful, Lucy. That was
Thank you.
way that was embodied. It was really, really, really beautiful. I loved all the tone, the way that the tone kind of really integrated the whispers, the breath. Yeah, it was really, 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 really effective.
Thank you so much. And Katrina, I was thinking, you know, when I was looking at the photographs, the captions, that start to be the voice of the photograph for me. And I hear, I mean, as we read, you know, we often hear a voice in our head as we read a piece of text, right? And I don't know what your uncle sounded like, but I know he's German and I have many German friends. And so there's this Germanic voice in my mind, like kind of speaking the labels or of the text of the photographs that are describing them. So that was the sound element in a way for me.
Yeah, and it's really interesting because this whole sort of idea of voice as well, because as I mentioned in the introduction, you know, Henning was really of that first generation who felt very disturbed by the sort of closing over after the end of the Second World War, you know, and one can be empathetic to a nation that was completely destroyed and despised for very good reasons, but then that sort of closing over and rebuilding and the consequences of that being a forgetting, and how quickly, you know, and I mean, particularly when you get as old as me and Simon, you kind of think, and maybe Lucy, you think, gosh, you know, he was born in 1950. That's only, you know, that's like 5 years after the end of the war. He came, you know, into consciousness 10 years. I mean, what's 20 years? It's nothing, but already the silence had descended. And so I think his voice for me as a child growing up, as a young person, and also through, you know, engaging with his work, and as you say, the text there is about speaking something that was silenced so quickly, and not by everybody, but socially, and the construction of society was silencing that. So I think, yeah, there is a very strong voice, and Henning as a photojournalist, the research was very, very important to him. So it was a forensic research, and in a way it goes back to that thing also of that sort of the macro, really looking at the detail of a place and a space and what's in it. And I think that's also really kind of what drew him to this topic. So yeah, voice, definitely. And again, you know, it's not something that can be put down and done once. Like, I think that's the thing, isn't it? That's sort of this idea of sort of re-engaging with these memories in a new context, a different context.
It's also I mean, as Karen Woods pointed out in the chat, you know, it's something also about the silence of photographs, and in this particular case, the absences of people, or the remains of people, or the traces of people, or the way in which people have marked or have been forced to mark the land. And so there's something about the way in which, you know, the kind of, I guess I hear in this conversation those plays between the way in which we place sound on things, the way in which sound is emptied from places or sites as well. And so, yeah, there's something very rich about our relationship, I guess, to land through sound, or the kinds of or the potential absences of sound as well.
Yeah, because also thinking about Nan Shepherd, I mean, you know, most of us know Nan Shepherd through her words, isn't it? Through the writing. I was kind of suddenly taken aback because I realized, oh, she only died in the early 80s. Goodness, I was living in Scotland at the same time. So whereas in my mind, she's of a different, you know, she's just over there and a different whole thing. And again, that's that sort of sense of the cycles and the layers. And her voice is very distinctive, isn't it? In her choice of words and the way she talks about the landscape.
Yeah, and absolutely. And then just sort of connecting back to other things you were saying, you know, she wrote The Living Mountain during the latter half of the Second World War. And there are points in the book where, you know, you are aware of, like, for instance, trees being felled for the war effort, or there are like these references to things that are happening in that contemporary moment, which are about the war going on elsewhere, but somehow still affecting the landscape that she's looking at where she is.
Also, one of the things this is resonating or remembering from the film, Lucy, one of the Nan Shepherd's lines there was the focal point is everywhere.
Yeah.
I think something like that, and just how photography actually draws you in that way, in that, okay, where there's, especially with the absence of a human subject, those Henning photos, the focal point is everywhere, and so it's almost like, again, that layering. Where do I look? You know, it really enables me to sit with these photos, and then you start to, the absence of sound, you start to imagine, like, what was the sound here? Is it eerie? Like, you can see the way, you know, you start to use your own reference points to build that picture, build that. And I feel like that's also really powerful in those that photograph series as well.
Yeah, and that's making me also think, I felt that you know, Tia-Monique, in your film, they and then thinking, actually there is a presence in your film, Lucy, and in Henning's photos, the presence of the person behind the camera, or the people behind the camera. And I felt, you know, particularly this time watching it, your film, Tia-Monique, was this sense of, and maybe it's because I had read a little bit about it, also your experience of making it, there is a sense of kind of tension, you know, and almost sort of, I don't mean this to use this word wrongly, but furtiveness, the sense of, we've got to do this quite quickly. I mean, and we've all got stories about shoots that never being long, but I mean it in a more sincere way than that. Of you know, I'm and maybe I'm repeating what you said, but that sense of reclaiming, but reclaiming has to happen quite quickly because there is pressure coming. And that you know, that adds attention. So the experience of the person behind the camera is also really kind of intriguing, isn't it?
Yeah, 100%. I would say one of the things that I didn't want to center the hostility, center whiteness in the film, like that really wasn't the film, but I also didn't want to ignore and be like, oh, we're living in a utopia. And so that's what we really did with the sound specifically. We did try to keep that kind of sense, that kind of what's happening. You know, you get that scene with Siobhan Edwards coming down in this kind of white dress coming down the hill, that real sense of like something is coming. There's this kind of real sense of tension. So all of these, the layers, that what it takes to be in that space.
It's in the sound, but I think it's also in the choreography, the you know, the body choreography, as it were. There is a sort of sense of energy, quite kind of which I'm sure was intentional.
Absolutely. The mix of the Africanness with the contemporary, and thinking about those kind of the ways that the free dancers layer on top of the repetitive nature of some of those phrases. 100%.
Great.
Go on, Lucy.
I was just going to ask Tia-Monique, how was it working in the, you know, the scene where there's a disused farm machinery around that? What was that? Yeah, that has like a whole other presence, because there's, again, absence of other activities that have happened there, right? And a sense of time, a different sense of time.
Yeah, we really wanted to think about the kind of rural British environment, English specifically. This is shot in Leicestershire, and like how it's never that far away from the town or the city. Like you can always hear that. And so that's why we chose to use, got permission to work on the farm. It was a really difficult experience. We had quite a hard experience, and we actually had to film it very, very quickly. We had to even though we had a permission, they didn't realize that we were Black. We only had one white member of the director of photography, Nick, was the only white crew member, and so it ended up being quite a hard experience. But I think it comes, like you say, it comes through in the dances, because that is actually what was happening at that time. Like thinking about, okay, this is where me and Nick had kind of done our recce, and we said that we wanted this farm as this kind of aesthetic, to think about agriculture, to think about the land, think about rural environment, but also how the UK, in England especially, how, like, you know, rural areas are so curated as a space, you know, and all of those things. But also, you know, this farmer being quite racist and finding out that, oh, you're not actually the people that we thought would be on this land, and having to film very, very quickly. So yeah, all of that is within those spaces and within the film.
Thank you. You probably this is actually, that's sort of coming towards the end of our little improvisation, would you believe. I maybe we could just, one other little thing, which is, I guess, connected to what you've just been talking about, and that is from the perspective of the performers, who you're asking to be embodying or being in the land in a way that doesn't feel like they've been plonked in it, even if the reality, Tia-Monique, as you've just described, was a little bit like, in the way Katrina described beautifully, the kind of furtiveness of the camera as a sort of I guess a symbol of the in and out aspect of the shoot. But I guess I'm curious about how the performers felt that, or did they, to what extent did they feel some kind of tension between that question of being in the land and then the potential imposition of this piece of technology, this device that's that's so present in our worlds, and which you might say is in direct contrast to that which I described at the beginning, the kind of screenification, or as a key aspect of that screenification of our lives. I don't know who I asked then. I just asked it into the ether.
No, I definitely hear you. I think it was really interesting to think about the contrast between where we were, and also in working with a trio with very clear choreography versus Natifa, who was working in the reservoir, or Chanel Clemenson, who was working in the tree, and how they were really able to kind of indulge in those moments. Because the demand of the choreography and the camera was less so, as opposed to a trio where the demand of kind of the camera where it needs to be, etc. So I think it's really interesting to think about those the dynamics and the relation between what's actually happening in the choreography, the demands of the camera in that particular moment, and how the dancers were able to respond with the environment. Of course, like I said, we spent a day beforehand like doing all this indulgent things and being like, oh, look at us dark-skinned Black people in the land. But then when it actually comes to filming, it's the same thing. Lucy, you've got 3 days, and it's like, okay, we're on the time, we need to move from here to here to here to here. And so yeah, I think that's really interesting from my perspective as director and choreographer as well, without time limitations, to think about how the best way to get that kind of essence out of the dancers themselves.
And I could just add in that because the film is a companion to a site-specific live performance that took place into the mountain, the dancers had all done, and they were all super excited about this, they'd done a lot of mountaineering training. That was an essential part of their experience. So we made the film before the performances happened, but they had been coming from various different parts of Scotland and England to the Cairngorms to basically practice being in the mountains, to do that mountaineering safety stuff. And they loved that. That was part of the whole experience, to embed them, to give them a sense of, how to be in that landscape.
Gorgeous.
Yeah,
can I've got a question a little bit for Lucy, actually, just kind of relates this. The choice to shoot on film and to make the film quite an obvious part of the film. Can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for asking. For me, that absolutely relates to a sense of materiality, and that felt like the truest way to connect with Nan Shepherd's writing and to honor that sense of trying to embody something, because film is a actual super 16mm film. It's a physical medium. It's about light on celluloid, and it's open to weathering, it's open to accidental chance, and the decision to allow those artifacts or happenstances of film, where you see an edge of a frame or whatever, is in a way to remind the viewer about the act of seeing, and that it isn't that we're just looking through something in an unfiltered way. We're all of us always looking through many different kinds of filters.
Great, thank you.
Thanks. So I think we should take our little break. And so this is the chance for everyone to zip away, maybe check your email, maybe, but hopefully just to think about how you might contribute to the conversation. And as I said at the beginning, you can do that either through the chat or you can just put up your virtual hand. So let's come back in 5 minutes. So that's 3 minutes past 3. I know it's quite precise. You can just stay in it's best to stay in the Teams. You can turn off your camera and then we'll unspotlight us and we'll be all together or apart together. See you in 5 minutes.
Thank you so much.
Simon.
Thanks. Just as it's hard to know if people are coming back in, but maybe they never left. Did you get through any of those emails, Tia-Monique? Or did you just ignore them?
I knew that email remark was at me. No, I didn't.
If
It was
you
at
leave
me,
them
it was a
long enough,
reminder.
they
It was
won't be needed anymore.
Right.
Oh dear, horrors.
So let's just hi, nice to see you again, Lucy. So everyone else, you're very welcome to put up your hand, your virtual hand, raise your hand. You can also ask a question in the chat, but there's also no pressure. We can, I'm sure we can find a way to keep talking about things, but I personally would love to hear any thoughts you have about the films or the conversation you've just heard, or perhaps things that haven't been going on, but have been going on for you as you've been, as I say, as you've been watching. So take your time and let's give it a little moment and sit in the silence.
I have a question for Lucy. I don't know if
I was going to see who
Did you
was
want
the...
me to be silent? Okay.
No, I was going to see who was the least comfortable with all that silence. So you won the prize, Tia-Monique. Go for it.
Well, I just had this question and I was like, okay, maybe while people are formulating, I can ask this question. But I was thinking about in both of our films how we have this like very specific moment with the feet interacting. Mine with the soil, and I'm not sure it's like some kind of moss or on the ground. Gorgeous texture. And yeah, I had some like really specific ideas when I was thinking of that scene, so I was wondering if you could I was wondering what your kind of that play, what if there was something specific you were thinking with that particular image, or maybe there wasn't, or I just wanted to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, definitely was. I mean, I think going back to the idea of expanding sight or connecting sight with touch, there's something really delicious about seeing somebody else or someone else's with their hand or their foot or even any part of the body, but the foot or the hand can really just deliciously go into the texture of something in a way that then certainly I know when I'm watching something, and it happened for me with your film, I sort of empathetically start feeling into that myself. So I feel like I have a moment of very strong tactile connection with the place that I'm looking at. And that was what was going on for me.
It's gorgeous and really, made present that sense of what it actually felt like that felt sense of being in that space. So thank you for that. It's gorgeous.
And in yours, I also had this sense of like a joyousness as well. That was like this other layer for me of like really relishing the freedom of like digging into the soil and in a way that felt free for a moment of all of the other politics around the right to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. What's really funny is that we actually had to like dig that up. It wasn't natural at all. We had to
it's filmmaking. It's
ruined the land
to break the illusion. to break the illusion, we have to dig out that dirt to really get that, and that's why it's so fresh and so like lush. But yeah, we really wanted to have that indulgent moment, like thinking about feet and thinking about like, again, thinking about the histories of travel of enslaved people and their relationship to working the land as well, like through those movements. I think we had this whole choreographed scene, but actually in the end, on the day, we were like, no, let's just see your feet in the ground, yeah. In the soil.
Both those moments actually reminded me. I started to ask myself the extent. Well, I'll start by saying I became very aware of temperature. You know, the temperature of land or of earth on skin in both of those moments, perhaps more so with the moment with the freshly dug earth, Tia-Monique. And it occurred to me that if you hadn't spent time, let's say, barefoot on land, and that's not so uncommon, right? It's not so common these days for people to run around barefoot, that any kind of experiences or rememberings of temperature may not even exist at all. That there's a kind of sensory thing going on there depending on experience.
Yeah.
That's really true.
So Greta, love to hear you.
Hi. First of all, I wanted to say thank you so much for sharing those beautiful photographs and the two beautiful films with us. I was really, I watched them all. I like first the film, then photographs, and then another film, kind of stayed within that world and was really like emotionally touched by them. And then I watched them over and over again because I really got into them. And I think one of the things that specifically stood out for me, and which I haven't encountered so much in other films, maybe as much, or screen dance films, is also when working in nature, that it wasn't just about, I guess, the people interacting with nature and the people touching the bark of the tree, which also part, but also seeing those little moments when nature is actually touching people back. And like a moment where the spider is crawling over the hand, or very subtle moments, someone just lying in the grass and you can see nature touching that person in a way. And the shift between the two, I think for me was really captured really well and really important in a way as well, that it's not all just coming from us as humans, us connecting to nature and us reaching out to it, but also nature doing that to us sometimes. And realizing when you're in your busy daily life, and you're walking through a park, and sometimes even then you're not very conscious of how nature is constantly also touching you. And that really came up for me also through the images and through the films. And I guess I have one small question as well, which I was, and that's maybe a little bit more for Lucy and for that film, the sense that I felt, and I was really intrigued by it, there was the choreography that unfolded. I was interested in, it was very subtle and very small movements and very, but you still had this really strong sense of this very connected people. And I'm just interested in, how the choreography kind of was formed and how you found those movements and the qualities of it. Did most of it happen actually in the space, in the where you were, or did you already have kind of ideas beforehand and brought them with you into the space? Yeah.
I want to just to cut in briefly, Lucy. Sorry, I wonder if either of you or both of you want to respond firstly to Greta's kind of that being touched and touching before Lucy, you address the direct question.
Tia?
Yeah, I think I really wanted to make the differentiation between a lot of initiatives that are about just Black people being in the environment. So there are lots of amazing initiatives which are about like Black girls walking. I think there's Black men walking, and I really wanted to make as clear a stark difference between that and a natural indulgence and a claiming of. And I think that that claiming, that reclamation has to be a conversation between the nature and the women themselves. So yeah, that's really one of the things that I was trying to bring out. Like, this isn't just us being here, but this is actually us being part of, and the land being part of us as well. But thank you for your observations as well. Thank you.
Yeah, and before I talk about the choreography, I think, you know, one thing that one image that immediately came to mind is there's a moment where one of the dancers is just putting their hand into water, and you may notice that their skin even goes red within the duration of the shot because that water is really cold. But also, I gave the impetus to think about combing the water. So rather than placing the hand in the water, there's the idea that the water is falling over and being combed by the hand. So there's something even in the intention is very subtly kind of tweaked. The film has, I mentioned earlier that it's a companion film to an incredible site-specific performance. So much of the choreography was developed specifically for the film on site, but the sequence of falling, where the dancers are kind of swooning, surrendering in a Nan Shepherd and other ways to the landscape, that very differently configured, but that kind of sequence appeared in the live performance as well. But a lot of the choreography, because we wanted to really embed the performers in the landscape, to decentralize the human, it made sense that a lot of the choreography came in response to very specific microsites within the larger site. And we found things, you know, I'm sure that was the same for you, Tia-Monique, as well, but we definitely had elements of the score, but then we refound things and allowed things like the wind and the rain and the sun, if it was coming through, to really influence then what happened in these kind of tiny little reciprocal moments.
Maybe I could say something just thinking about that idea of the nature of the land touching the human. I think if we think about Henning's photographs, in a sense, they are very much about nature reclaiming from human activity. So I think there's that sort of longitudinal touching of back, as it were, that nature reclaims. But maybe also that's something that we slightly depend on. I often feel that's something that we, and don't want to always be the negative voice in the room, but that sense that we can do whatever we want to a land because it'll grow back, it'll be fine. But it's that sense of, well, can it grow back? How will it grow back? Will it grow back the same? What will be changed? Does that matter how it changes? So it's really interesting, that idea, and I think that's right. I think across all those works, there's no sense of the humans being sort of centralized and dominant, and that again relates to Nan Shepherd, doesn't it? The sense of going against that idea, because I think one of the other dangers of our relationship to landscape is often that, well, I certainly saw that in the Highlands of Scotland, that it can turn into a sort of playground, like we go and do stuff and we rock climb, we mountain bike, which is not to say those things are not good things to be doing, but that it's more of that sense of how can we have an equal relationship with the land, not an extractive one, which then has resonances across lots of things.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Katrina, because that was a big part of the planning for both the film and the live performance, that there were certain areas everything was very carefully researched, and there were certain areas that potentially were too fragile to have been rehearsed and performed on, and so they were not used. So we were always using more robust elements. So even like there was an area of moss adjacent to the shot where the feet are in the moss that wasn't as robust, and so, you know, we weren't using that. You know, it's very, very much keeping in mind that we're working with a very sensitive, living, breathing element, you know. So I think that's really, really important that you bring that up.
Thanks all. Anyone else? I'm going to say from the audience, just doesn't feel right, that word, but you know what I mean.
I want to ask Tia what she's working on next. Tia-Monique, what are you working on next?
I was literally just sitting here after I finished watching the film, like, oh, how do I get 30 grand to make another film? But yeah, I've actually been working a lot commissioning artists, Black artists in digital Black dance, and so I've been on a different side of of the process, which has been fun and interesting. But for my next film, The Noise My Leaves Make is supposed to be one in a trilogy of short films, and so the next film is supposed to be about grieving practices in kind of Caribbean, like what does it mean to mourn, like mourn big, mourn small, but also I'm thinking specifically, as I've spoken a little bit about and spoken with Katrina about, this relationship between Scotland and the Kitson town where I'm from in Jamaica, and thinking about like how those mourning practices might make those connections between land, body, but again also how like in the Caribbean we have like this 9-night practice of 9 nights of a kind of funeral process, and how we kind of do that well. And I think everyone's kind of doing this, but out like in this, is it post-COVID, current COVID moment? How those kind of mourning practices have become more and more important for all of us, but especially in our community. So yeah, that's supposed to be the next film. But anyone's listening, I'm looking for 30 grand to make a film on that. How about you?
I am next going to be working on a collaborative project, but I'm also trying to develop another film which looks at empathy between human and more than human. An amazing dancer called Andrea Buckley, who's an incredible improviser, has started a practice of improvising with horses. So that's what I'm also looking for 30 grand. So or even less would do. 10 would be fine.
Well, maybe there's a prize at the end of this conversation. You never know. I mean, universities
never
so
know.
flush.
Never know.
It makes
I
me.
will say this summer I completely forgot this, but this summer I am working on a project with the Postal Museum on the dollar for dollar, which is looking at kind of the Royal Mail's implication in enslaved in the kind of basically on the island of St. Thomas, how women used to fuel those Royal Mail steamships, which used to bring letters from the Caribbean islands to the UK about what was going on on the colonial isles. So I'll actually be making a short film with some young people around their responses to their exhibition that they've currently got there called Voices of Resistance. So yeah, I'm really looking forward to that, actually, working with the same team.
Sounds great.
Do you both, I guess Lucy, your film was made in 2019, right? And Tia-Monique in 2022. And I see a couple of questions coming in. If you can briefly say, how do you feel, to what extent do you feel changed by making these films? Or how is it that you are changed by making these films? And then we'll get to these couple of questions. Or not?
I think this film really changed me a lot. It was from a specific pot of funding by Pat Knox-Solo, from Pat Knox-Solo's. It was kind of an EDI AHRC funding, in which she asked me as a postdoctoral researcher, she gave me money to dream, like, what would I do if I was able to really use the money to kind of forge my academic and artistic career as I wanted, without focusing on one or the other. And it's really allowed me to do that in a really important way. And it was supposed to be a life piece, but COVID happened and everyone was making films. But I feel like I didn't just make a film and was like, okay, I've made a film. Like, I really got the bug for making films and realizing that my practice could exist in that. So I think it's completely changed my artistic practice as my first film, and like really have the hunger to do more, again asking for that 30 grand. So yeah, it's really changed me, and the process itself as well, realizing what I can do differently as a kind of more studio theatre based artist before this point. Yes, shown me so much potential, and how it's just resonated so far. It's really changed me in so many profound ways. So yeah, it's such a gift to film.
Likewise, I feel like it feels like such an amazing thing to be able to make art right now, and even did back in 2019, that I feel like every work really, really changes me and forms who I am. But it felt like an incredible privilege to work with Nan Shepherd's writing, and to be in the Cangons, and to work with Simone and that particular set of dancers, all of whom are incredible, sensitive human beings. So yeah, very grateful for that.
Thank you. Stefan, do you want to ask something?
Hi. Thank you so much for being so generous today. It's been so inspiring to hear you talk about your work. And I just was thinking about with the photos, how they kind of act as a container for memory. They kind of represent this landscape that's a container for memory, and then that links quite nicely with those other things, how landscape holds things that you don't necessarily see on the surface, and it connects with you. But my question was just to say, Tia-Monique, you mentioned that it was part of a trilogy, and that you mentioned the second, but I'd be really interested to know what your third film would be as well.
Yeah, the third film was supposed to be, so essentially there's a part of the film that didn't make the cut because of a costume blip. Because of a costume issue, but it was actually such a beautiful yeah, it was called, the scene was called Rituals of Care. So the third film is supposed to be about kind of like, one was about death, but like water and birthing and life practices as well, around Black womanhood and the care and the rituals around that. Less I'm really sure on the second one, less sure on the third one. But yeah, it's supposed to be around taking that particular scene and making it into a short film.
Thank you so much. I haven't got the 30 grand.
Oh,
but I would be really interested to talk about the possibility of how that work might develop. So if you can link up through the chat, that would be great.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. It's really, I really enjoy, and Lucy, your film as well, really, really beautiful. And the connection with Nan Shepherd's really interesting. I run an art gallery in Mid Wales, so it's kind of landscape is really on our doorstep. We're kind of really immersed in it's not Cairngorms, but it's that kind of landscape, and it is, again, it goes back to that Anthropocene thing of all those layers of history and longing and loving and loss and pain, and it's kind of, they're all kind of built there under the surface. So thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, Stefan. And Sarah Jane, please feel free. You don't need to turn your camera on. You can say your thing.
Am I unmuted?
You're good.
Good. Okay, thank you, everybody. This has been the most beautiful interlude in my day, because I'm marking and reading a PhD, and that's why you can't possibly see my face. I'm in that kind of home gear state, but this has been a fantastic interlude. And I love the way the films sit together, and I saw the photos today too for the first time. They sit really beautiful in their difference together. And I was thinking about how great it would be to see them in a gallery actually together. But my question, I think, is about time, because I was thinking about seeing the human in the natural landscape, and in particular the sense of time and temporality and shifting temporality that the presence of bodies articulates, very different in both of the films. So I just would love to hear just a little anything from both of you about how you think as filmmakers about how moving bodies extend or contract or alter our sense of time, because choreography does that. And I realized it when I was watching your films here. Suddenly that bit near the end where they dance together and something really happens to time in that moment, and time quickens and shortens and extends. Or otherwise, like the body can produce a sense of timelessness too, as it moves. So yeah, that's why I say it's almost a question, but not quite. It's like half observation, half question. So anything you can do with that, I'd love to hear. And thank you.
I could jump in. Oh, go over Tia-Monique. Go.
Well, I was actually about to respond about my sense of your film in that. I mean, I can speak about my film, but just that that real sense of slowing down, which I really appreciate, because that is the sense when you go into kind of, especially more rural areas, that there is a sense of, there's no clock watching, there's no, you're ruled by the sun, essentially. Like, how long do you want to spend there? So yeah, I really appreciated that slowness, and with the sounds as well, how that layered in. I think with the noise my leaves make, yeah, there are many different time registers in that film, and I think it goes to Katrina's sense of, there's a sense of foreboding, the sense of quickness, there's a sense of play, that playful energy, and the point, my favorite part of the film, if no one can figure out right now, is that ending with Latifa, just because of how it really extends when she's just in that reservoir by herself, that kind of the extension of time, that sense of kind of resolve of, okay, releasing. And I think it's really interesting because that was the easiest part to film out of the whole shoot. It was the quickest one, but it is the part of the film where I really feel like all of it kind of indulged, but there's even in the shots, that kind of probably one of the longer shots, it really allows that time to extend. And I find that really such a generative part of filmmaking, and allowing the audience to kind of have all of these different registers that are not just about accompaniment, but also about the visual register as well.
Yeah, I really relate to what you're saying there, Tia-Monique, and I think that for How the Earth Must See Itself, we were really trying to take our timing from the landscape, and it's a risky thing to do in some ways in film, because we're so cultured to be watching things that are edited very quickly and to have our sense of time truncated and contracted. But it really was like, how can we risk this? Because maybe if we get it right, there will be a sense of being able to slow down the rhythm of the watcher to enter into this other state. So I'm sure that will be different for lots of different people, and probably some people will find it far too long and annoying. But that was the risk that we wanted to take. And I feel like, sorry, just one more thing, because
Sure.
as filmmakers, you get told all the time that don't overextend a shot because it becomes indulgent. I mean, this is what you were saying there, and I feel that is true in one sense. And like when you're editing text, you're always looking to cut away the chaff and to be really left with the kernel of something. But I think that doesn't mean that I think there is a place for extended moments on film, and I think it's really important that we still risk that and give audiences the opportunity to see that. Ideally, as you said, Tia-Monique, earlier, in a cinema.
Well, thank you. I was just thinking as you were talking, Lucy, that a TikTok of the noise of how the Earth must see itself would be just quite something, wouldn't it? I really appreciate the question, Sarah Jane, also in terms of the way in which my particular experience of these films and also of the photographs of Henning. So I'm just going to wrap up here to say thank you, Tia-Monique, Lucy, and of course Katrina for partnering me on this, and thanks Lily for the support and the help in making it all happen, and also to everyone else for being here. It's an absolute pleasure to have these conversations, and I love the way they duck and dive and find their own feet. I've put in the chat the next conversation, which is very soon, the 17th of June, Rosemary Lee and Simon Whitehead, who apparently are friends, which is outrageous that they're talking to each other, but they are very, very wise heads, and it will be just a tremendous pleasure to hear them improvise on this particular team's thing. So thanks everyone for your time and energy and your ears and eyes. And hopefully see you in a couple of weeks.
Thank you so much.
Bye. Thank you so much.
Bye.